the iPhone XR. A really interesting phone. So I've been talking about the iPhone XR for almost an entire year now. I made a first video on the 2018 iPhones back in November 2017, only a few days after the iPhone X has been released. And I've mentioned that Apple was to release 4 iPhones in 2018, the 6.5-inch Plus model of the iPhone, which actually ended up being the iPhone XS Max, the 5.8-inch model, which ended up being the iPhone XS, and then the 6.1-inch LCD model, which ended up being the iPhone XR. And I've also been talking about a redesigned iPhone SE 2, which up until this point we haven't seen. And the iPhone XR is definitely the most interesting one out of all three, and that's because, first of all, it is Apple's lowest priced new iPhone for 2018, and then second, most people are bashing this phone over its display, its RAM, and a few more other things which I'll mention in this video. And considering that this phone is coming out later on this month, I wanted to give you guys my own thoughts on this phone, because it's a really controversial phone, the iPhone XR. So yeah, grab some snacks, and here's why the iPhone XR might actually be the best iPhone that Apple has ever made since the iPhone 5 back in 2012. Enjoy. Okay, so ever since my November 2017 video, I've done quite a lot of Leaks and Rumors episodes talking about the latest leaks and rumors on the 2018 iPhones, and I've said that this phone, this LCD iPhone, would actually be Apple's best-selling iPhone in 2018. Mostly because it would look like the iPhone X, it would have a lot of features that the iPhone X comes with, however, it would cost significantly less than the iPhone X did back in 2017. And when Apple first announced the iPhone XR, I was quite surprised, actually, because of a number of reasons. So first off, I was definitely not expecting them to call it the iPhone XR. But okay, R and S are actually not Roman numbers like the 10 is, so you can mix them up, even though it looks a bit off. But anyway, R is also before S in the alphabet, which makes it inferior to the S, so maybe that's why they decided to go with the R. And then the second thing that surprised me, apart from the name, was that the only thing I was unsure about this phone, aside from the name, was the processor. So I wasn't sure if Apple was going to use the Apple A11 chip or the Apple A12 inside the iPhone XR. I was mostly leaning on the Apple A11, especially if Apple wanted to keep the cost low. But surprisingly, Apple included the Apple A12 processor, the same processor that's inside the iPhone XS and the iPhone XS Max. And what's even more surprising is that even though it comes with a single camera module on the back, just as I previously said, it does support portrait mode with the back-facing camera. Now, this is quite interesting because normally on the iPhone 7 Plus and newer, Apple uses actual hardware in order to do that. So the iPhones actually use the 2 camera modules on the back in order to create a depth map, because there's actually a bit of a difference between 2 cameras in terms of what I actually see. But on the iPhone XR, you only have 1 module, so Apple had to do pretty much everything in software. Basically the same as Google does it with a Pixel 2 and a Pixel 2 XL. So the XR offers more features than we were expecting, and the cost is still quite low. So it starts at $750 or £750, which is actually £250 less than the iPhone XS. However, this one also comes with a larger display than the iPhone XS, so 6.1 versus 5.8-inch panel. Now, a lot of people have started complaining about 3 major things when it comes to the iPhone XR, and those are the display, the design, and the RAM. So when it comes to the display, yes, it is an LCD panel instead of an OLED panel, which means that the blacks won't be as deep, won't be perfect blacks as on an OLED display, and then the colors would not be as vibrant as on an OLED display. However, the display is also larger than before, so it's a 6.1 inch versus 5.8 on the iPhone XS, but the main reason why people complained is that the resolution of the display isn't that high. So it's actually 1792 by 828, which, yes, it's not even a 1080p display in 2018. Now, just to give you guys a bit of context, this is my first Samsung Galaxy flagship phone, the Galaxy S4, and the S4 came out in 2013, 5 years ago, and even today it looks a lot like a modern smartphone. So it has some very thin side bezels, a very sleek and thin body overall, but it also comes with a 1080p display, which was also an OLED display at that time. And then you could also argue that the iPhone 6 Plus, the iPhone 7 Plus, and the 8 Plus, so all Plus models of the iPhones, also came with a 1080p display in an actual smaller form factor and a smaller display, which was 5.5 inches versus 6.1. Now, a lot of people confuse resolution with pixel density. These two things are completely different. So think of resolution as a matrix of pixels, which is pretty much what it is. So the larger the display is, the more you would stretch this matrix out, and the larger the squares or the pixels would be, which means that you would be able to count the pixels, which would result in a not so pleasant viewing experience. Now, pixel density per inch, or PPI, is what we measure the clarity of the display. So back when the iPhone 4 was launched in 2010, Steve Jobs introduced the Retina display, and that was actually a huge thing back in the day. So on the iPhone 4 and later on, I can't believe how small this thing is, and the iPod Touch 4th generation as well, the PPI, or the pixel density per inch, was so high that you could not distinguish individual pixels, so the screen looked like printed paper, basically. I remember going to a large electronics store in my hometown every week after school just to see the iPod Touch 4th generation, which they actually had displayed. I was amazed by how sharp that thing was. And back in 2010, no other device had a display with a PPI as high as that. No laptops, no tablets, no phones, basically nothing. And it was this sharp because it had a PPI of 326 compared to 100 or 200, mostly, so some of them were actually under 100. And Steve Jobs said that 326 was the limit at which the human eye could distinguish individual pixels from a normal viewing distance, which was actually true. From 30 to 40 centimeters away, you could not see any pixels on this thing. However, if you look closely, for example, by holding the phone like 10 centimeters away from your face or so, yeah, you could definitely distinguish individual pixels. And Apple kept reusing the 326 PPI in all of their future iPhones until the iPhone 6 Plus, which was actually the first iPhone to get a PPI increase to 401 this time. But Apple was still behind Samsung, or for example even LG, which back in 2014 released the LG G3, the first smartphone with a Quad HD display. I even did an exclusive interview with LG back in the day, and that phone had a PPI of 538. Now, seeing that phone in person up close, I could definitely see how clear the display was. Even from a regular viewing distance of 30 centimeters or so, it did look really, really sharp, sharper, and a bit more in focus, so to say, than an iPhone 6 Plus, for example. Not a massive difference between the two, so let's say on a scale from 1 to 10, if 10 was the G3's sharpness, the iPhone 6 Plus was close to a 9. And then with the iPhone 10 in 2017, Apple increased the PPI again to 458, which is what we have on the iPhone XS and the iPhone XS Max as well. Now, the iPhone XR, this thing, let me just try and find it, so many phones on my desk, but the iPhone XR has a PPI of 326, which is lower than the iPhone 6 Plus, and the same as Apple has been using on the regular iPhone 6, 7, and 8 models. So, yeah, if you're coming from those phones, the display would be just as sharp. And fun fact, this is also the same PPI that Apple uses on the Apple Watch. Fun fact, 326 PPI on the Apple Watch, and also the iPad mini, also 326 PPI. And then the larger iPads have a PPI of 364, while the MacBook Pros have around 220 PPI. So if you have a recent iPad or recent MacBook Pro, the XR would actually be sharper than those. Now, the problem here is that a lot of budget phones today, including, phones like the Poco phone or the OnePlus phones, or many Xiaomi or Honor smartphones, or Chinese smartphones, they have a higher PPI display, and they can cost half, if not even less than what the iPhone XR costs, which is pretty much true. But then a lot of these displays aren't great in terms of color reproduction or viewing angles, especially when it comes to LCD panels. And Apple has had the best LCD panels in the past, and they've even said that the iPhone XR now has the best LCD panel on any device on the market, which is pretty interesting to test. So yeah, sharpness-wise, 326 PPI is not as unusable as the media claims. I mean, yes, it could have been better, but it's sharp enough from the regular viewing distance. And when it comes to the viewing angles and the color production, the iPhone 8 Plus, for example, had an amazing display, a stunning LCD panel with deep blacks for an LCD. This was really impressive, and great overall color. Also a P3 panel, by the way, and the XR is supposed to be even better than the 8 Plus was. Now, the main issue here is, fun fact, this is not a 1080p display, which means that you cannot watch 1080p content. So on YouTube, for example, the high selectable quality would actually be 720p. And then the second backlash that this phone got was in terms of the design, on how much thicker the bezels are when compared to the iPhone XS. And this is true, but keep in mind that this is an LCD display, not an OLED, so having such thin bezels and a rounded panel is not an easy thing to do with an LCD panel. But still, even with a thicker frame, the bezels are significantly thinner than most of the Android competition, which still features a thick chin on the bottom, some of them even with OLED displays. And finally, the third major complaint regarding the iPhone XR is when it comes to the RAM. So the iPhone XR, just like the iPhone X from last year, comes with 3 GB of RAM. Now, 3 gigabytes of RAM might seem like a joke when compared to the 8 gigabytes of RAM that the Note 9, for example, comes with and many other Chinese smartphones. However, every year I do my ultimate speed test series between multiple smartphones, and every year the new iPhones with 3 gigabytes of RAM or even less were actually faster in both raw performance and also RAM management than their Android counterparts. Some of them with even double or triple the amount of RAM that the iPhones had. Actually, the only exception to this rule was the iPhone X from last year, which had worse RAM management than the Note 9 or the S9, but then the iPhone 8 Plus didn't have this issue, so it was mostly Face ID, the Face ID camera that was taking up a lot of memory in the background on the iPhone X. Now, the iPhone XS and the iPhone XS Max have actually been upgraded to 40 gigabytes of RAM this year, and I can actually tell you that RAM management is amazing. So upload time is much improved over the iPhone X from last year, and I'll be doing another ultimate speed test, and multiple ones actually, with the iPhone XR, so definitely subscribe and notifications. I'm really curious to see how the iPhone XR handles RAM management, since it has 3 gigabytes of RAM and it's the only device with 3 gigabytes of RAM, like the iPhone X, but the Apple A12 processor instead of the 11, like the iPhone XS. Okay, so overall, I need to actually have and use the iPhone XR for a few weeks before I can give you guys my full in-depth review. But if you're considering whether or not to get the iPhone XR over the iPhone XS, I would actually say yes. It's 250 pounds cheaper, and the only major downside is, I wouldn't even say the PPI of the display, but the fact that it's an LCD display over an OLED that you get on the iPhone X and the XS. And then the second downgrade would be the dual camera on the back. You don't have optical zoom because of that dual camera. However, you do get portrait mode. So yeah, you do get portrait mode, you get the same iPhone X style design, and you even get the longest battery life in an iPhone ever, fun fact, even longer than on the iPhone XS Max. And the pre-orders for the iPhone XS have been lower than the iPhone X from last year, which could point towards a lot of people waiting for the iPhone XR pre-orders to start, which are actually on the 19th of October. But yeah, feel free to watch my 30 things you didn't know about the iPhone XR video in case you wanna learn more about the iPhone XR and some interesting facts about this phone. But I would say give the iPhone XR a chance. I'm not defending the XR, but I'd just say give it a chance, wait for it to come out. I still think that this is going to be Apple's new golden phone when it comes to sales, especially thanks to that large variety of colors that the iPhone XR comes in. But yeah, definitely subscribe and notifications by tapping on that bell icon if you're new to the channel and you want to see more in-depth tech videos like this one. And then also let me know in the comments, what do you think about the iPhone XR? Do you think it's worth it over the iPhone XS and the iPhone X, or do you think it's a huge scam from Apple? Honestly, I do think it's worth it more, or Apple scamming you the least with the iPhone XR when compared to the XS. Those prices are insanely high on the XS and the XS Max. Definitely let me know what you guys think. Also join the zone by tapping that join button. You're supporting the channel, and you also get access to some pretty cool exclusive perks. Check out my ultimate camera comparisons between the iPhone XS and the iPhone X, and the iPhone XS and the Note 9 if you want to see how the XS compares to those phones, and I'll be doing some more in the future as well. But yeah, definitely give this video a like if you enjoyed it, to let me know. I'm Daniel, and I'll see you guys in my next video. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.